guys, Matt with CJ Off-Road here. We've got our 2020 Jeep Gladiator in the studio, and we're going to be installing Rough Country's brand new 6-inch lift kit. As you can see in front of me, I've got a ton of parts out here on the table, and don't worry, everything will get installed and we'll show you step by step on how to do so. I do want to first go over what Rough Country includes in this kit, including these crazy big 6-inch coil springs for both front and the rear. They've also got a set of these control arm drop brackets to help with the factory geometry and make the ride a whole lot smoother. One thing that I'm really impressed this kit includes is a front drive shaft. You don't see that too many in many kits, and with this 6-inch lift you really need it to alleviate that drive shaft angle, as well as to extend the shaft out to meet up with the front axle. We've also got a nice set of shocks here, some rear brake lines, all the hardware that we need here to install everything. Plus we added on a front track bar that is sold separately, but you can find it on CJ's website. Now today we're going to show you how to install this on your Jeep Gladiator and get that thing up through the roof. Alright guys, now we're at the front of the Jeep and we do have most of the stock components removed. We're going to show you a short clip now to get you up to speed on where we are. That way you can get your Jeep looking the same way we have ours. First thing that we're going to do is use a 22mm socket to ditch these factory Overland wheels. Now these things are great if you want to keep it stock, but for us here at CJ Off-Road, they're not going to do. So there's 300 miles on them and they're about to go. So let's get them pulled off. First thing that we're going to do is get the front axle supported after we got the wheels and tires off, and then remove the sway bar links. On the passenger side, you only need an 18mm socket because there is a flag nut on the inside so it'll catch. And then up top we're going to use an 18 as well with an Allen key inside there so it doesn't spin. But let's get this off a while. Then remove the bolt, flip that out of there, and we'll set this aside. I like to put them right back where I pulled them off, put the flag nut on. That way when we pull the sway bar off, we know exactly where the bolts went so we can swap them over to the new pieces. Then using an 18mm socket and wrench, remove the lower shock bolt. After you've got that removed, remove the 15mm nut that holds on the ABS and brake line bracket on your lower control arm. And I like to set the nut right back into place after you pull off the bracket. Using a 21mm socket, remove the lower track bar bolt. This will allow the axle to droop more. After you've got that track bar bolt out, you can see we've got a ton more droopage here in our front axle. So we can just easily remove the factory front spring. Okay guys, now that you're up to speed with where we're at, the first thing that we're going to do is start messing with the control arms, drive shaft, as well as the drag link and the upper end of the Pitman arm. So we're going to start with the control arms now and then work our way to the drive shaft and make our way to the drag link. So the first thing we want to do is remove the inner control arm heat shield. We're going to grab a 10mm socket and remove the 2 bolts that are holding this on. It's pretty difficult to see, but once you pull this off, you won't be needing it again, so you can just go ahead and discard it. Next thing we want to do is remove the lower control arm nut and bolt, and we're going to be using a 21mm socket as well as a 24mm box wrench on the back side. To remove the upper control arm, what we're going to do is go ahead and grab an 18mm socket, and due to the fact that this has a flag nut going through the frame rail, we don't need to use any box wrench. We can simply use an 18mm and remove it. So for the next portion, we are going to be removing the front drive shaft. In order to get the lower section of the drive shaft removed, we're going to go ahead and use a large pry bar with a 15mm socket on an extension. And because you do have the control arms out and you should already have your axle supported, make sure you have the jack stands or pole jacks underneath, as well as a loop that goes underneath the flange of your front axle to make sure that when you pull that drive shaft out, the axle doesn't want to spin on you, because you still do have a few things hooked up and you don't want to ruin any wires. Remove all 4 of these bolts. They do have blue Loctite, so they are a little tricky. Then we can pull this side off. So the next thing you're going to want to do, it is really hard to see, but there are 8 T47 Torx bolts holding this onto the transfer case. Now go ahead and remove all those. I like to support the drive shaft up and out of the way, and then I use a pry bar too to hold the end. We did use a zip gun here to make it a little bit quicker. Once you have those removed, you can pull your drive shaft out. So the next thing we're going to do is start working on our Pitman arm and removing it. What we've got to do is remove the 18mm nut that goes from the drag link up through the Pitman arm. Once that's removed, we can grab a 43mm socket to remove the nut on the steering box. It's probably not something you have in your toolbox, so this is probably the only specialty tool besides a Pitman Arm puller that I would recommend. All right guys, well, after the magic of video editing, a few days later, we are back on our Gladiator build here. We were waiting on some control arm drop brackets, and in the meantime, we actually installed a set of these Alcon front brake and rotor kits. And if you're interested in checking that out, definitely go to our YouTube page, which you're already on, and check out that video, see how that installation went and why I'd recommend these to you. But for now, what we're gonna be doing is installing these control arm drop brackets right onto where the factory control arms go. We've already done it on the passenger side just to get our bearings and figure out how to do it. And now what we're gonna do is show you how to do it on this driver's side. So what you're gonna do is go ahead and grab the outer side of the bracket. You'll notice it has a notch and you wanna match it along with the frame rail. Now for the lower bolt, you're gonna go ahead and install the factory bolt with the provided rough country spacer. Get it to line up with the other side and then put the factory nut back there. And just get that started. So now you're gonna put the inside on. That's gonna slip over that bolt you just installed. After you take the nut back off, I just like to put it on there, that way it stays. Then we can tighten up that nut by hand. And as you can see, these will line up. And what you're gonna do is one's gonna go on the inside of the bracket, one on the outside, and we'll use the factory bolt and flag nut up top to get those mounted. So what we're gonna do is go ahead and put a spacer in between here that Rough Country provides. And then once we get that through, we can slide our flag nut up through the frame rail and start that bolt by hand. We're not going to tighten up anything yet here until we get our control arms into their locations down below. So what we're going to do now is align the lower control arm into the lower brackets. That's why I said don't tighten anything up, because you will need a little bit of wiggle room. And then with your adjustment bolt here, you'll see that it has a flat edge, and that's going to give you some adjustment for your pinion angle. Go ahead and slide one of the slotted washers as well as a regular washer on the outside. We're going to get that to go through and also bottom out like that. So once we have this on the ground and take it to alignment, we can get some adjustability out of our pinion angle with this bolt. Now once that's through, we go ahead and grab the exact same for the other side, slot it in, make sure it goes in the slots properly. Then we can grab our nylon lock nut and get that snugged up. So then we'll repeat the same process up top, except we don't have an adjustable nut. We'll just use the provided hardware from Rough Country. And then we'll just put a nut on the back side there. And we'll repeat that exact same process. Obviously, we have it done on the passenger side already, but you can see it's pretty simple. Once we're done with everything, we'll come back and torque these all down to factory specs and tighten up the front of the control arms, which we loosened up earlier. But it really is that simple. It's just a two-piece design. Just make sure that this hooked and notched end is going to be out towards the outside of the frame rail, and they match the same way the bow does. So in the center of here, it'll actually pop out towards you and then flatten off. You also want to make sure that both of these slotted sections are facing the outside of the vehicle. That way you can make some adjustment to the pinion angle once this thing is done. So the last thing we said was talking about removing the Pitman arm using a 43mm bolt. Well, we did just that. We removed the 43mm, and then what you're going to need to do is use a Pitman arm puller or a 2-claw clamp like this that'll actually pull that Pitman arm off of the stud. Now, as with our Jeep, it is really new, so we didn't really have too many miles, and it didn't take too much force to get this off. This is probably going to be one of the specialty parts that you either have to borrow or buy to do this installation, but they're only like $30 to $40 at your local auto parts store. With that being said, we're going to set this one aside and install our new Rough Country drop Pitman arm. Go ahead and put that nut back on and get it tightened up. So we're going to go ahead and set our Pitman arm into place. It is slotted, so you have to work and figure out where the slot is, and then we can reinstall our giant 43mm nut on here. It's going to be snug at first, but we will go ahead and use our power tools and get that tightened up. So we're going to come back and then torque that down a little bit later, but it is nice and snug on there and we're good to go. So after we've got the new Pitman arm on, we can now reinstall our drag link into place. So go ahead and push that on. and use the factory nut up top. We're not even gonna snug that down yet. We'll just leave that kind of loose because we are gonna be messing with our track bar and things up front. We will go back and get everything tightened down. Just at this point, without coil springs, without all that installed, we're not gonna do it yet. Okay guys, so I have 2 yokes here in front of me, and we did do a little off camera. We removed this yoke here using a 33mm socket to get the factory nut off. This is gonna be the factory yoke. You're not gonna need to use this anymore. We are gonna reuse the nut using a little bit of Loctite to put this brand new one on. This one is gonna accept our new drive shaft, go right in there with the included bolts, but for this one, it can be tossed aside because we're not gonna be reinstalling it. So we've got the new yoke installed. Now we can go ahead and get it tightened down. So now we have the Jeep lifted up a little bit further. We've taken the strap that went onto our pinion and removed that. And we're gonna be installing these massive 6-inch coil springs on the top there first. Grab our bump stop with a bolt already in there and slide that underneath. And we picked ours up a little bit higher than it needed to be, but we like to have a little bit of extra space instead of struggling. We can lower it down a little bit now. We gotta get these bump stop bolts tightened down, and then also get the shocks in next. And then we can move on to the sway bar links and everything else in the front we have to button up. So what we're gonna do is I put the nut on down below of this bolt. We're actually gonna get these bump stops tightened down before we put the shocks on, because on the passenger side, it's harder to reach in from the back with the shocks. So we'll go ahead and use a 15mm socket and 15mm box wrench to get these tightened up. So next thing we're gonna install are going to be the Rough Country 6-inch shocks. Now what we're gonna do is install them in the top first using the factory bolt. Make sure the standoff is facing towards the inside of the Jeep. So it'll look just like that, slide up through, and then we'll put the bolts in there and get it snugged up. So now that we have the shock in, the next thing we're gonna do is lower our brake line using our extended brake line brackets. First thing we'll wanna do is go ahead and grab a trim removal tool and pull this ABS clip out of there like so to give us a little bit more slack. After we have that removed, use a 10mm socket to get the factory bolt out of the frame. And we can pop that out of the frame rail and pull down on it. You're gonna grab the Rough Country bracket with the pointed section to go into the frame up top. Then we're gonna go ahead and use our factory bolt to get this snugged up into place. And get that snugged down. And with that installed, now what we can do is actually put our brake line bracket and use the slot into that hole, and then grab the provided hardware to go through there. So grab our 7/16 provided hardware with a washer on this side and a washer on the back side, and then a lock nut behind there. And we can get that tightened down as well. Get that nice and snugged up, and we'll be good to go to move on to reattach the brake line to the control arm. So after you have all the brake line relocation done, you can go ahead and slide this bracket back onto the lower control arm and get it snugged up using a 15mm socket. Once that's on, what you can actually do is pull the brake line through the back of the bracket a little bit to give you some more space. Just make sure it doesn't get too tight up front. But as you can see, we've got plenty of slack here too, and our shocks are completely drooped out. This is about as far as we're gonna be going with the droopage to make sure that our brake lines are gonna stay fully intact. So the next step on this process is to install our front track bar relocation bracket. Now you can see we do have this installed here with the factory bolt and the spacer included in the proper bag. Now once we have this on, what I'm gonna do is actually attach the sway bar link bolt onto this side. That way we have this nice and firmly into place, because we do need to drill 2 holes and use 2 included bolts to get this nice and secure down there. We're not gonna put the top part of the track bar in until we're all the way done. Plus we do have to modify the sway bar link over here. So we got a little bit to do here. Well, first, we're gonna tighten this one up, tighten the side one up, and then we can drill some holes. And we're just gonna get the sway bar bolt over here just snugged up. Obviously, we don't have the sway bar in between there, so there's nothing really gonna hold that bracket from tweaking over. So just snugged up, and then we're good to go. We've got this one all the way tight. Now we can drill out this hole, and then there's one up top. So now what we're gonna do is go ahead and grab our drill bit and drill this first hole. Once you have it drilled through, you're obviously going to knock off all the burrs that you cut with, and then touch this up with a little bit of black paint. Also be careful not to rub your finger that quickly because you might cut it. So what we're going to do now is install the supplied hardware along with the mechanical lock nut on the back. We're going to put one here and one up top. We've already got the factory bolt here with the flag nut on the back and the spacer in here. So we're just going to leave that where it is. Also leave the sway bar bolt where it is until we get both of these tightened up. Then we can remove just the sway bar bolt, but leave everything else here, torque it down, and we'll be good to go. Now Brendan's going to jump in here and use a Sawzall to cut off the passenger side sway bar extension bracket. Now the reason we're cutting this off is because we're going to be installing some sway bar quick disconnects, and in order to do so we need to put a stud through that and be able to have it removable. So we are going to have to remove this here. Just grab a Sawzall or any sharp cutting device, but this is the only real modification we've had to make so far, so not too bad on this kit. So now that that's cut off, what we're going to do is just grab some quick drying high performance enamel here just to spray paint that way it doesn't rust in the future. So just go ahead and shake up your can, give it a light coat, and then we can move on. So the whole reason we removed that is so we can get our pin into this. So obviously we drilled the hole a little bit tight there, but it'll actually thread in pretty nicely. And what I'm going to do is take this nut, go in from the inside. Oh no. And we're going to thread that in to our nylon lock nut on the back side here. Stick a pin in here and then tighten up the back side. So we're actually going to remove our lower track bar factory bolt so that way we can get the nut onto the stud, because there's pretty much no way to get it on. We tried a couple methods here, but this seems to be our best approach now, and then try and get a socket in and get it tightened up. All right guys, so just like we did on the passenger side, we've got the driver's side installed here with the stud down below. We've also got our cotter pin down here installed through the slot. And then up top here, this is going to be your adjustable end with a jam nut here. So this is allowing you to pick it up and figure out exactly where you need it to align each side individually due to different weight variances depending on what your rig has. To get this top bolt and nut tightened up, what you're gonna have to do is use a 15mm socket in here, as well as a 14mm to hold this stud into place. Everything down below is already tightened. We're just gonna go ahead and grab our 15 and snug this up. So we're gonna use a 3/4 inch box wrench to get this jam nut snugged up. And then we can paint mark everything and move on. So for this step, we did opt to get Rough Country's adjustable track bar. This will allow us to adjust the front track while the vehicle's sitting on the ground. So what we're gonna do is mount it up in the upper location using a factory bolt. Throw a nut on the back side there. And then since this is adjustable, we can get it adjusted here, leave the clamps over that, and get it knocked into location down below. Once the whole vehicle's sitting on the ground, we can get it all adjusted perfectly. And that's one of the advantages of having a dual adjustment here, is that we don't have to remove the track bar to get everything sitting the right way. So now the next step is gonna be to install our drive shaft. What we're gonna go ahead and do is throw some red Loctite onto our factory bolts. Throw this end up over. Get this end installed using our factory hardware with our red Loctite. There's one bolt in. Get the second here lined up. Third one. And these are going to be utilizing the same 15mm socket we started with. So we're just going to go ahead and snug these up a while the Loctite is still fresh. We don't want it to harden without them being in. And we're going to do this evenly to make sure we're on the proper way. All right guys, well we've got the whole front end wrapped up and actually went back and torqued everything down to the factory specifications. It's really important to do this while it's on the ground, so we are going to wait on a few of the components to do that, but we'll do it off camera and make sure that all the weight is settled on the vehicle. That way we don't torque any of those bushings and get them to bind up before the weight is on the front end. With that being said, what we're gonna do now is move on to the rear end. It's actually a lot more simple than the front was. There's no drive shaft, just a couple drop brackets and a track bar relocation. So why don't we hop on there, we'll show you a short clip on how to get it back to stock, and then we can get started adding our rough country lift. First thing that you'll remove in the rear is gonna be the shock bolt that holds on the lower portion of the shock. Now these are bigger than the front. You're actually gonna need a 21mm socket and 21mm box wrench on the back, so pull these off first. We do have the rear axle supported, so we can remove the sway bar links and adjust it as needed. Being that this is the first time we're working on the back of a Gladiator, there's only going to be 2 nuts. Well, there's going to be 1 nut on the lower section here, just like the front of the JL. And then up top, there's actually a welded on section on the back, so you only have to remove the bolt. So it's pretty interesting to see all this and finally get to work on it. And just in case this doesn't want to spin right off, you need to use a 6mm Allen key and then an 18mm to hold the center and pull it off. So slide that on first, put the 6 in the center, and you can just hold it or spin one and the other, vice versa. See if we can get a full rotation, and we can. Of course, I would have to have them on my fucking side too. Huh? After the nut is removed, we're gonna pull that top one off. Then remove the sway bar. Now once you have that done, what we're actually gonna go underneath and do first is drop our carrier bearing on the Gladiator, and we're gonna install the drop bracket that is included with the kit. Now what this is gonna allow us to do is actually droop this axle a little bit further, and I think while we have that done, we should be able to squeak our coil springs in a little bit easier than they were. These things are absolutely massive, so we need as much droopage as we can get in the rear to make sure that they fit in. So let's hop under and get started. The first thing that we need to do is remove the 2 16mm bolts holding this onto the cross member. We can grab our bracket and install that. I'm gonna use an extension here with a 3/8 drive and just pull these off nice and slow. Now, if I didn't mention this, we also do have a pull jack supporting the carrier bearing. It's very, very important that you have something supporting that, or else when you pull these off, it'll just fall. So we definitely don't want to harm our drive shaft at all, and we don't want it to fall either. So with both of those removed, I'm going to try and lower this down very slightly. As you can see, it is good to have a pull jack under there, as you can take a lot of the weight off and just slowly let it fall down. Obviously, we're holding the drive shaft as well at the same time, but just gonna lower it down here nice and slowly. Makes it a lot easier to have this piece of equipment too. So now I'm gonna grab our carrier bearing drop bracket, and as you can see, we're gonna face it with this front section going towards the front of the vehicle, as well as these little notches going towards the back, and they're gonna be at the top. So what we're gonna do is put the factory hardware through there. Do the same on this side. Just get both of those started. And then I'm gonna snug these up using a 16mm box wrench, because obviously we can't fit a socket into there. Once those are snugged up, we'll use the included hardware using a 9/16 wrench to get it bolted back into the lower location. Now we're gonna use the included hardware to get this bolted down to the bracket. What I'm gonna do is actually, I use the pull jack here just to pick it up, and we're gonna leave it loose until we get both bolts on there, because there is a little bit of play on either side. So we want to be able to make sure that both of them go in the way they need to. And once you have them both in, I'm gonna use the pull jack to my advantage and try and line up both edges. So both of these should be flush with the bracket, so I can make sure our drive shaft is square. Put a little bit of tension on there, and then we can get them tightened down using our 9/16 hardware. Now we're gonna be installing the coil springs. I've got Brennan here to help me, because I'll be honest with you guys, this is not a fun process. You try and get right under there. All right guys, well, as you saw, we did get the spring in. It's tight. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this is a tall spring. Once you have everything together, it will work properly. We did use a small pry bar to kind of pry it over these lips on the driver's side. Albeit the passenger side is much easier. We should have showed you guys how to do that one on camera. But what would the point of the video be if we didn't show you the hard side? So I would definitely recommend a second pair of hands. If you got a buddy that can come over, and a long pry bar will help you get it over these ledges and then over this last lip to make sure it goes into the right location. But for now, we're gonna move on and put on the shocks, and then we'll work onto the track bar bracket. So now we're gonna install the shock. What we're gonna do is put the shaft side up using the factory hardware. Since you have the upper bolt in, you can now install the lower bolt. I like to use a jack stand or a jack if you're on the ground to align this up. Now we can get it tightened down using a 21mm socket and 21mm box wrench. We'll get that torqued down to factory spec. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is install the brand new sway bar links provided by Rough Country. We're going to use the factory hardware up top to get them started. And then down below, we're going to use the included hardware, which has a grade 8 bolt, a flat washer, and a mechanical flange lock nut on the backside. So we'll just go ahead, using our pole jacks here to help us align this, pop it right through. We're gonna use a 3/4 inch socket as well as box wrench for this, and an 18 for up top. Both of these are gonna get torqued down to 55 foot-pounds. What we want to cover next is installing the rear track bar bracket drop. Now we see that we already have the track bar removed, so we've got a bare surface to work with here. So the first thing we're going to install is this track bar strap. What we're going to do is slide that over the factory track bar mount. And you're going to want to lay that horizontally with the holes aligning to where the factory track bar bolt goes. And with that sitting like so, with that being installed, we can now align our track bar drop bracket, sliding it over the track bar strap. And then with that on through the center hole, we're going to be installing the supplied hardware from Rough Country. We're going to just put that through the bracket and the strap we just installed. And then in between there, you're going to install your crush sleeve. And if you do it right, it should all poke out the backside, where you can put another washer and your nylon lock nut. We're not going to tighten it at this time because we do have another bolt to install. And then we have to do some drilling to make sure we can get this thing in the exact right location. So now what we're going to do is install the smaller of the grade 8 bolts in your hardware pack. You're going to put this through and put your mechanical lock nut on the backside. And this is going to be 9/16 hardware. Now this here we can tighten because that's going to get this to sit flush onto the factory track bar where it's welded onto the frame. So we'll go ahead and tighten that now. Now that we have that nice and tight, you can see that this is actually really nice and tight too, where we put the bolt in. So we should be good to go as far as drilling. What we're gonna do is mark our locations. There's 2 holes to drill, one on the back side here and one on the front. We're not gonna show you because we will have to modify our exhaust a little bit to get to it. If you've got a factory exhaust, you don't have to worry about anything. We unfortunately have a dual tip exhaust, which sounds really good, but we will have to pop that off to drill this hole in here. All right guys, well we did fast forward a little bit, but to drill this, there really wasn't an easy way to see it on camera. All you're gonna need to do is drill it out to a 3/8 inch hole and then use the provided hardware in there and get it snugged up. After that, we did use the included bolt up there, which you saw us put it in first, and then install our track bar. Now to do that, all you use is your factory hardware down here and your factory hardware down at the axle end, and get them snugged up. We'll torque it down once it's on the ground. Overall, it is pretty simple there. We only needed to use a ratchet strap a tad bit just to pull it over, and that was just to get that lower hole lined up. But now we're gonna work on to the last step, which is installing the brake line on the driver's side. So the last step for this installation in the rear is to install the included braided brake lines. So what we're gonna do here is first clamp onto this with a vice grip on the lower side of our factory brake line, and then using a 12mm wrench, we're gonna remove the upper fitting by turning it to the left. After we do this, we will bleed the brakes once the installation is finished to make sure we have the proper pressure coming out. So once that's off, we can set this aside. So using a 15mm, we'll remove the lower banjo bolt to get the factory brake line out of the way. Then with that removed, we can go ahead and install some new copper washers onto our banjo bolt. Set that up into the place, making sure to put one on the inside there. Once that's tight, what we're gonna do is actually put this back through the bracket that just popped off. And then we're gonna thread this into our new stainless brake line. And once you have that on, what we're gonna utilize is a 17mm box wrench to hold this bottom part, and then that same 12mm up on the top. Once you have that back together, go ahead and reinstall your brake line bracket using a 10mm. Once you have that back all together, you can reinstall the clip to hold the brake line up. And you're done. Well guys, here it is, the moment you've been waiting for. The 6-inch rough country lift kit is installed on our Gladiator. Now obviously we've installed a brand new set of 17-inch KMC wheels with the 37-inch Ironman All Country tires. And obviously we could go even bigger. You could probably fit 42s under this thing without even blinking an eye. I'm really happy with how this kit turned out. We don't have any drive shaft issues. We actually took it down the road and it rode really nice. It's a softer ride than what it was stock, but overall it does feel really good for a 6-inch kit. Now the installation time is obviously going to be about 8 to 10 hours here. It took us a couple days to do it because we are filming. I wanted to show you guys each and every step of it. But what do you guys think? Let us know in the comments if you like this Gladiator build, if you like how high it is, or you think we should go bigger. I mean, obviously this is going to be the first step to our full-on Gladiator build. We're going to be throwing a ton of other parts on this thing, so make sure you stay tuned on our YouTube page as well as onto our social media outlets so you can stay up to date on this Gladiator. Now until next time, stay tuned for our review video because we're going to be taking this thing out and really seeing what it can do on the highway and a little bit of off-road, just to let you guys know my full opinion after a few weeks of driving it. Until next time guys, I'll see you out on the trail and I hope you like this Gladiator kit.